9 bad prepper strategies that won't get you past the first 90 days. Number 1 is I'll just hunt and live off the land. No, you probably won't. You might try to hunt, but guess what? Loads of other people are going to have the same idea. Unless you live hundreds of miles from civilization, the population of deer, wild turkey, and small game will be decimated in an event that renders the food system inoperable. Or hunting is not as easily as simply wandering in the woods, taking aim with a rifle, and popping off a buck. Have you ever hunted? Have you ever done so recently? And by recently, I mean in the past year. Have you ever field dressed an animal? Can you hit a moving target? Do you know how to set up snares? Do you know how to butcher and preserve meat? Are you in good enough shape to drag a 200-pound carcass through the woods? If you can't say yes to every single question listed here, hunting probably should not be your go-to plan for feeding your family. Number 2, I'll just go to the woods and live there. This is closely related to bad strategy number 1, but it's worse. Living in the wilderness is not going to be a marshmallow roast. First off, there's not going to be any marshmallows out there. Just a lot of predators and food that needs to be killed and skinned before you can eat it. In this strategy, people like to talk about their proximities to a national forest. There's just 1,000 acres right over that fence. Okay, but when's the last time you went into that forest more than a few miles on foot? Did you spend more than a couple nights there? Was the weather inclement? What are your local predators, not including humans? Do you have a camping kit that you can carry on foot? Will your children and spouse also be able to carry supplies? Are you planning on building a house with some tarps and a Swiss Army knife? What will you eat? What are you going to drink? What can you forage in your area? How long can you actually survive on what you can carry? How are your first aid skills and what supplies do you have? Can you handle the loneliness? And what about the other perhaps less than moral individuals that have the same idea? Can you light a fire with wet wood? Have you ever camped outside of a campground area? What if it rains? In many climates, getting wet is a death sentence. Number 3 is I'll bug out on foot for 73 miles through the mountains even though I don't regularly exercise. If bugging out on foot is one of your plans, I'd like to suggest you pick a clear day. Put on a loaded pack and some hiking boots and go for a practice hike to your location. Go ahead. See, this one really bothers me. There are a large contingent of armchair preppers who have this idea. However, they don't exercise regularly. They look back 20 to 30 years to their high school or military glory days when they played football, ran track, or had a drill sergeant screaming right behind them as they ran. Just because you were once very physically fit, that does not mean you are still able to hike up a mountain in bad weather with a 50-pound kit on your back. Embarking on an overly ambitious bug-out journey can endanger not only you, but the people making the trek with you. If you have a heart attack halfway up the mountain, who's going to help you? What if you have an asthma attack? What if you injure your out-of-shape self? Who is going to help you? If the situation is bad enough but that you're bugging out, you aren't likely to get airlifted to a hospital for medical care. Will someone put their own safety at risk to hang out with you while you recover, thus forcing the family back to bad strategy number 2? Now, I'm not trying to talk anyone into staying in a bad situation when bugging out could be the wiser course of action. But if your bug out route is a long distance over difficult terrain, you need to get out there and start training before you put the lives of everyone in your team at risk. Number 4 is I don't need to store food. I'll just take everyone else's because I think I'm a badass. Now, who can forget that episode of Doomsday Preppers that was shared all over preparedness social media and websites, in which Redneck and his team of merry marauders discussed their plans to take everything that preppers that lived by had stored away. This guy is Tyler Smith from Doomsday Preppers. Most preppers, Smith says, are concerned with marauders taking their supplies. It's not an unfound fear, he says. We are those people. We'll kick your door in and take your supplies. We are the marauders. We're not in it to stockpile. We're in it to take what you have, and there's nothing you can do about it, Tyler Smith said. We're your worst nightmare, and we are coming. Now, Smith was 29 at the time and was the leader of the Spartan Survival. His group had more than 80 dues-paying members. Smith founded the organization in 2005 to train and prepare others on survivalism. Smith, who is a paroled felon who incidentally went back to jail shortly after his televised waving around of firearms, might be a joke, but you can't ignore the danger of groups with similar plans. This Yahoo had 80 people on board with him, for crying out loud. And if you happen to have such a plan, you should probably realize that those of us who are really prepared won't stand around twiddling our thumbs and crying when you come to attempt to relieve us of our supplies. We've prepared for people like you too. The post-SHTF life expectancy for those who plan to use this strategy will probably be a short one. You might manage to raid a few people's retreats, but in a world without rule of law, it's pretty much a given that the justice which will be dealt to the intended victims will be swift and final. Number 5 is I have a lot of weapons and tools, but I never use them. But I have them. Do you have prepper tools that are still in the box? How often do you make it to the shooting range? When's the last time you actually felled a tree and then chopped firewood? And did you do it without a chainsaw? Now, there are loads of different examples that I could give you about tools that just sit in their box, awaiting their moment of glory when it all hits the fan. Skills with an axe are not a given. Accurate aim doesn't stay with you if you don't practice. Have you ever attempted to pressure can over an open fire? Even building a fire is not easy if you only done it once or twice. Not only is it vital to practice using your tools during good times when you have backup options available, but you need to test your tools to be sure that they operate as intended. I once purchased a water filtration system for use during off-grid situations. It was missing an essential gasket. Without that gasket, it would have been totally useless. I could have MacGyvered something together, but the point of buying all this stuff is to save your MacGyvering for things you don't have. Number 6 is I don't store food, I store seeds. Now, I really love gardening and have stored an abundance of seeds. Seeds are a very important thing to store. However, if you store them to the exclusion of food, you're going to have a really bad time. The problem with depending on seeds for your food supply is that stuff happens. Stuff like droughts, aphids, blossom end rot, the thrice damned deer that managed to get past your fence. So if this is really your plan, have you grown a garden recently? Have you produced food on your current property or your retreat property? Do you have a compost system? Have you developed your soil? First-year gardens almost never produce what you want them to. Do you know how much produce your family will consume in a year? Because of these concerns, a garden should not be a standalone survival plan. It is a vital part of long-term preparedness, but you must also be prepared for potential of failure. Now, number 7 is I'm going to hunker down in the city and scavenge what I need. Now, this is a terrible idea on so many levels, it's hard to know where to start. First of all, when utilities get interrupted in those large metropolitan areas, they're left with few options. It's hard to dig a latrine in a concrete jungle. Remember, when New York was hit by Superstorm Sandy, people were defecating in the halls of apartment buildings trying to keep their own apartments moderately sanitary. Unfortunately, sewage built up in the pipes and spewed into apartments, filling them with deadly human waste. Store shelves will quickly be emptied before and after disasters, leaving little to scavenge. If you happen across the wrong place, you're likely to be shot by a property owner defending his or her goods. If you wait too long to evacuate, roadways are going to be blocked. You can end up being a refugee with no option but the camps. Cities will be populated with desperate people, some of whom were criminals before the disaster struck. Even those who were friendly neighbors before the disaster can turn on you because desperation can turn anyone into a criminal in order to feed their families. Number 8 is I've got my supplies and now I don't need to think about the gloom and doom. Some people like to stock their goods and forget about preparedness. They don't consider the threats that they might face, but mentally preparing for disasters is a very important step. This vital step can help you do the most important thing when a disaster occurs, accept that it's actually happened. The prepper mindset is one of problem solving and flexibility. It's a unique way of looking at the situation, assessing the options, and acting that defines the prepper mindset. By refusing to consider the things that could happen, you run the risk of being able to immediately accept it when it does happen. This sets you up for a very dangerous period of hesitation that could mean a death sentence for you and those who depend on you. Now, last on our list is we're going to set up a perimeter and shoot anyone who breaches it. First, instead of just protecting you, this can actually make you a target. Less than ethical people may start to wonder what you're protecting so stringently and may work to develop a plan to overtake you. Alternatively, even more ethical people may decide they don't want a group like yours in the area and plan to forcibly evict you. If the situation doesn't start off like the Wild Wild West, people who adhere to this bad strategy will definitely turn it into that situation. And you have to remember, Those who survive the life-changing event will be the new founders of our society. Do you really want to live in a place where people have to shoot first and ask questions later? How we choose to live will set the course of how we continue to live.